We live in the greatest republic on the face of the earth, the greatest republic since Rome, and yet our second highest office has been held by a series of drunks, thieves, traitors, murderers, liars, womanizers, and just plain non-entities and losers. It's very depressing.
The next winner on the list is Rufus King, our 13th Vice President. As usual, he was much more interesting before the office than during. Not that he had much of a choice.
Perhaps the only man to ever actually want the job, King held the office for an astounding 45 days. Most of it spent in Cuba.
King was a strong moderate in the Senate. This seemed to outshine his personal life.
Yes, Miss Nancy, as Andrew Jackson called him, or Aunt Fancy, as he was also called, was a proponent of wearing jewelry, silk scarves, and even wigs long after they'd gone out of fashion.
He was also roommates with future President James Buchanan for 16 years. People called them the Siamese twins.
Yet, due to his cool head, his personal life never affected his public reputation. Wait, that can't be right. Seriously? Huh.
In 1837, King was elected Senate President pro tempore, which means in the Vice President's absence, he would be acting Vice President.
The demon of faction should find no abiding place in this chamber, but every heart and every head should be wholly occupied in advancing the general welfare and preserving unimpaired the national honor. I earnestly solicit your cooperation, gentlemen, in aiding my efforts to put down every species of disorder. Rufus King, January 1837. But his demeanor was threatened in 1841 when King almost went the way of Aaron Burr.
Fellow Senator Henry Clay of Kentucky insulted a newspaper editor that King sided with. King responded in kind.
Blair's character would compare gloriously to that of Clay.
That is false. That is a slanderous, base, and cowardly declaration. The senator knows it to be so.
Mr. President, I have no response to make. None whatsoever. But Mr. Clay deserves a response. That is inappropriate.
After the outburst on the Senate floor, King wrote out an official challenge to Senator Clay. Clay was the challenge, so he got to pick the weapon first. And then both men had their seconds with them. The second's role was to take over if either man had been wounded or killed in the duel. And the men marked off paces and prepared to fire.
And though Aunt Fancy was fully prepared for this ill-advised meeting,
both King and Clay were promptly arrested.
Didn't even get a chance to pull the trigger. The curse of Burr continues. Of course, King's life up until the vice presidency was all there was. After two concerted efforts, he finally won the seat in 1852.
He decided to recuperate from his consumption, what the bourgeoisie call tuberculosis nowadays, in Cuba, which at the time was more of a island resort for rich Americans than the commie hellhole that it is now. For the first and only time in American history, the Senate voted to let a vice president take the oath of office on foreign soil. King is the first and only vice president to do this.
Upon returning to the U.S., however, King would have one day as vice president on American soil before he would pass away. But his legacy would live on.
The author John Updike put it best when he called King one of those eminences whose strong impression on their own times has suffered a gradual erasure upon the tablet of history.
However, upon his death, King County in Washington State was named in honor of his contributions to this country.
Unfortunately, in 1986, it was rededicated in honor of Martin Luther King, because they hadn't named anything after him for 2 months.
We now move on to our 14th Vice President.